Welcome to the Economy Magazine. I'm Benjamin Netanyahu with a top report from the global economy. Today's magazine, we have a special interview with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu by the founder of Israeli financial newspaper, The Marker, Guy Rolnik. First, a look at the headlines. The International Monetary Fund greatly reduced risks for another global downturn, but cut its growth forecast. The IMF said a stronger recovery in rich countries such as the US and UK had sharply reduced the risks of another global downturn. But the global crisis lender cut back its global growth forecast to 3.6% this year and 3.9% in 2015, pointing to the threat from the Ukraine crisis and the slowdown in major emerging economies. It warned that the world still faced years of slow and subpar growth unless countries embarked on structural reforms to improve their growth. Booming investor demand has driven down yields on Italian and Spanish bonds, narrowing the gap with those of ultra-safe countries. The gap between yields on Spanish and Italian government debt and US treasuries is the narrowest it has been in 4 years. Spanish and Italian bonds maturing in a decade now yield about 3.2%, whereas US Treasury debt yields 2.68%, and German 10-year bonds yield 1.56%. Investors' bets on Italy and Spain are backed by the belief that the European Central Bank will keep interest rates low for the foreseeable future. The US Federal Reserve, meanwhile, pulled back its support for bond markets and hinted at interest rate hikes, which would cause bond prices to fall and yields to rise. Japanese car giant Toyota is recalling 6.4 million vehicles globally over 5 separate issues. The latest recall, which affects 27 different models, is the 5th major one that the company has issued in recent months. Overall, the company has recalled more than 25 million vehicles over the past 2.5 years, far more than the number it called back in 2010, the worst year in terms of damage to its reputation. Indonesians begin voting for a new parliament on Wednesday in an election likely to be dominated by the opposition Indonesian Democratic Party struggle. Nearly 190 million Indonesians have registered to vote to choose a new parliament and so decide which parties can field a candidate in the presidential election 3 months later. Rising living costs and concern over income inequality are high priorities for Indonesian voters this time around. Despite being the world's 3rd largest democracy, about 11% of Indonesia's 240 million people live below the poverty line. Another 30% are barely above it, many of them in the rural sector. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is considered one of the most impactful political figures in the Israeli economy. Since his first term as Prime Minister, Netanyahu has been a major force in the process of economic liberalization and helping push Israel towards a free market economy. Under his watch, the government began selling its shares in banks and major state-run companies. Netanyahu has often cited Italian economist Luigi Zingales, the author of Capitalism for the People, Recapturing the Lost Genius of American Prosperity, noting that he learned a lot from him. Guy Rolnik, founder of Israeli financial daily The Marker, decided to bring together Netanyahu and Zingales for a conversation about the future of capitalism in the 21st century. Following is a record of their discussion.
Prime Minister and Professor Zingales, we're going to talk about not current affairs, but we're going to talk about capitalism, usually something that we don't have enough time to talk about because things in Israel are happening so much, so we can't go back to the basics. And the first question I want to raise for both of you is a simple question. The question is, we'll start with you, Prime Minister, are you a capitalist?
Yeah, I'm for free markets, if that's what you mean by capitalist.
Okay, and what is capitalism for you?
It's the ability to have individual initiative and competition to produce goods and services with a profit, but not to shut out somebody else from trying to do the same.
Before Professor Zingales will join us, I'd like to hear what's the reason that his book resonated with you so much, and why didn't you mentioned his book a couple of times. What is it that you find interesting and illuminating in the way Professor Zingales looks at capitalism?
Because I think he focuses on the basic thing, which is how do you guarantee competition? Because you can have the distortion of competition, what we call market failures, in supposedly a free market economy. And you have to constantly make sure that you maintain this principle of competition. And it's not obvious that you'll maintain it. First, because efficient firms get market share. And if they dominate in market share, they can shut out competition at a certain point in non-competitive ways. Secondly, they can link up with other powers. in your book, the main source of power that companies can unite with are politicians and thereby create crony capitalism. In our system, it's connecting to other powers. It could be press powers that have control over political powers that give you crony capitalism. So you can either have it two ways or three ways to prevent competition. And if you prevent competition, you raise prices, and you usually are penalizing the lower segments of society who are more dependent on lower prices for products and services as a fraction of their income. And
So just to bring
that's something that I'm particularly keen on avoiding.
Before you were a prime minister, you were the Ministry of Finance, you Minister of Finance. When was the point that you realized that Israel capitalism is becoming, or it is, crony capitalism, and we have to deal with concentration and with breaking up banks and so forth?
No, you're going way too forward. I thought it was that in 1976. I went to a project that was the first time that the Boston Consulting Group looked at governments and worked for governments. It was actually the government of Sweden. And they wanted to do a strategic plan for the government of Sweden. So I was on that case, and so I had to look at other governments. And I went around other governments in Europe in 1976. And I was looking at Britain, I was looking at France, I was looking at other countries, and I could see that they were stymied by concentrations of power, political economic power that prevented competition. And I thought, as bad as they are, ours was worse because we had very little room for private sector competition. And to the extent that we had companies, they were government-controlled companies or union-controlled companies. And so you didn't really get the competition or the growth. That was as early as I remember it. And I said, well, if I ever have a chance, I'll change that.
And why is it that you decided to come up with the concentration committee 5 years ago or 4 years ago? Where did you see crony capitalism in Israel as described in Professor Zingales' book?
Well, I saw a lack of competition in a lot of places. You had a pyramid structure in our country, and that means that you had and cross ownership between financial and business entities, and that distorts competition. I thought we'd have to get rid of it, and that's basically something we started 3 years ago. It took us a while to get it through the Knesset, but it's a very important law because it flattens the pyramids and it prevents the cross ownership, so it encourages competition. But there are other things we need to do.
In Israel, I think we've passed the point where our inequality is only a product of the market system, and it's a product of failure of the market system, where you see inequality because of crony capitalism, because of lack of competition, and because of winner-takes-all economy.
First of all, if you want equality, real perfect equality, go to North Korea. You don't want that. You want to have the inequality of merit, which is what you talk about. You want to have a meritocracy. You want to have initiative, risk, talent, the ability to create new products, new services, to be rewarded. Otherwise we'd still be living in caves, trading sticks and bones and rocks with each other. The reason we got out of there is because somebody figured out that it's better to be outside in a shelter and till a field than sit in a cave and chase animals, okay? So progress depends on that. But what you want to make sure is that the guy who made that invention doesn't block other people from making inventions. There's a question, there's an obvious tension between innovation and initiative and equality. So you have to strike that balance.
I think that, as the Prime Minister said, if we all become richer, I don't really care that somebody becomes more richer than me. But if only a few get richer and the other don't move, that's where the consensus for the capitalist system disappears. And I fear that in the United States we are reaching that point. And once you undermine that consensus, then you have the risk of having some sort of a new socialist movement, etc., that tries to destroy the market. So precisely because I love the market, and I believe, like the Prime Minister, that it is important to have those incentives in place, that I want to make sure that there is general consensus for the system.
In your book, you emphasize a lot about the perils of concentration, and sometimes concentration in the business sector is the root of all evil in the economy. It creates corruption, inefficiencies, and inequality. And you focus a lot on the financial system. You think that the financial system is the worst when you have concentration. Can you explain why?
The financial sector is really crucial for the control of the economy through its loans, through its investments, ability to reallocate resources as a power which is disproportionate vis-a-vis every other power. There is only another sector which is as important, which is the media sector. I mean, those are the two crucial sectors. If we don't have competition in those two sectors, we don't have a competitive economy.
Exactly right. I think 1% of the businesses received an inordinate amount of the loans, okay? So that means that a lot of other businesses that could have been successful didn't receive the loans. And if that is based on connections, based on a club, okay, then obviously you lose a lot of potential growth in the economy. All right, so you have to put in reforms that at once guarantee the solidity of the banks, but also create competition among them. And we still have a way to go. We haven't done it. We've taken the banks out of cross ownership of businesses, but we still don't have as much competition in the banks that I'd like to have in Israel. We need that.
So, Professor Zingales, I explained to you before this interview that in Israel we have two banks that control 60% of the debt market, 60% market share. This is exaggerated concentration.
Yes.
Okay, so what can we do about that?
I think that one needs to intervene from day one, trying to sort of break down this excessive concentration, make it easier to enter for new firms, or new banks, so that they break up this, or what you have done, trying to separate some of the jobs. So a separation between investment and commercial banking can be a solution or a partial solution.
You have to make sure that there is no concentration of great power. And in this task, I think we've done quite a few things in Israel, but we have a way to go. And in any case, you never come to a resting place. You never stop competing. And now in the global economy, we have to be doubly competitive, not only with our firms, but in our macroeconomic policy and our social policies and our education policies. We have to compete. We're competing all the time. It's an open market.
You are aware that in Israel, we have a very strong sentiment among many people, especially the young, that we are not a meritocratic system. It means a lot of people think that in order to get ahead, you have to be well connected, and talent wouldn't be enough. Are you aware of that strong public sentiment?
I'm aware of it, and some of it is justified, and we have to fix it. But you fix it by having monopolistic power stripped away into competition. I privatize companies. I always said I privatize the Bazan, how do you call that? The
refineries.
Refineries. They said, well, it's a monopoly refinery. You can't break it up. I said, well, why can't I break it up? I want to break it up into two. They said, well, you're never going to have scale possibilities of smaller refineries. I said, really? So I called up some guy in London who was the world's expert. He was an Israeli, one of the world's experts on refineries. Said, oh, there are about 150 such refineries in Europe. So I said, okay. But even if I wouldn't do that, I tried. If nobody will buy it, you're right. If they buy it, then it means that there is sufficient scale for competition. The number of natural monopolies is nothing. It's minuscule. You can privatize into competition. You can foster competition.
You have to instill competition first, because if you privatize before competition, you're in big trouble.
That's right. But you can have competition. That's the main thing. And by the way, I think this is the biggest task. And you want to restore people's faith in competition. If you use protests and populist pressures to get rid of competition, you'll actually make the situation worse than what you're trying to cure. And we have, I think, on the whole, we've made some progress. We haven't done enough yet, But I think we've done more on a relative basis than many other countries. But it doesn't do anything for me because I say, so what? We don't sit on our hands. We still have a job to do.
Professor Zingales, ending notes.
I'm impressed. I have to say I never met a politician with such a clear vision of what to do, which coincides with mine. So I'm very flattered that he read my book. But
That's why I like you.
Prime Minister Netanyahu, Professor Zingales, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So much for Israel's controversial Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and the Israeli economy. That brings us to the end of this edition. I'm Benjamin Netanyahu. Please send us your comments via our website and Twitter, and join us again tomorrow.